So let's talk about, we were going to talk about the Google's quantum chip, but let's switch to David Sachs before we wrap up here. Related to this, right, is that the current Biden administration has been putting, Lena Khan, putting a chill in the air about what can Google do, can't do, suing people and what have you. But the new administration is supposed to be, less regulation, more hands off, pro growth, pro whatever. But they just put David Sachs in charge of the crypto and AI. He's the crypto and AI czar, right? Whatever the hell that means. David Sachs is, obviously famous for being on the All In podcast. He's a Silicon Valley investor, billionaire, what have you. He's actually very anti-Google. He's anti these massive tech companies and actually believes a number of them should be broken up. And so there's a really interesting, like, pro-innovation, pro-growth, anti-big tech vein happening here. Now, I think it is worth pointing out, because I don't think enough people point this shit out. David Sachs and all those guys are fully conflicted, right? What they want is Google to be broken up so that their investments and their SaaS companies have an opportunity to grow and become highly successful in a world where Google and whatever can't just outcompete them with with a new product or whatever. They're incentivized to see a Google be broken up. But this guy's in charge of crypto and AI now for the Trump administration. Hooman, maybe you run in those circles maybe a little more than I do. What's your take on Sachs, on that community of people being highly influential with Trump and the Trump administration? We should also point out, by the way, our friend of the pod and regular guest, although he hasn't been on for a while and for reasons that'll become obvious, Emil Michael is in that circle. He was named as one of the candidates for transportation secretary. And I don't think it's talking out of school to say he's helping with the transition. And so, even our podcast is not too disconnected from what's happening here. And yeah, there's a lot of Silicon Valley in the Trump administration, and there's a lot of implications for Silicon Valley in the Trump administration. And I think David Sachs is the poster child for that reality. What do you make of that entire thing, Hooman, and David Sachs specifically, and the implications for antitrust and the large tech companies?
Yeah. So I think let's start with the antitrust side, because we're talking about incentives. I think there is an inherent duality to their incentive structure. The first assumption that we make is, okay, well, we want as many of these big tech companies to be broken up because definitionally that allows our companies to compete. I think to a degree that's true. But remember, we're in a liquidity crunch in the Valley as well. We've had years of no IPOs and years of no M&A. In particular, the big M&A has all been blocked by the current administration and Lena Khan. So if you don't have liquidity at the back end of the process, there's no venture capital. And so you need Google to be able to buy something for $2 billion, right? And so
Yes.
There's a little bit of push-pull, right? You want to hobble probably, but you don't want to incapacitate, because then where are the $10 billion, $5 billion exits? Everyone can't go public. And so the fund sizes have gotten very large. So I think that's going to be interesting to watch play out, because the how behind how they break them up will determine that balancing act, right? I'll call it the hobble posture, right? Powerful and large enough to acquire, but not so powerful to destroy. And I think that's difficult. And I'll tell you, to say the Valley has gotten in this administration, there's a specific subset of folks in the Valley, Elon Musk obviously being the tip of the spear in this particular mission. I think I read somewhere, and I stand to be, maybe corrected, but he put on the magnitude of about $200 million of his own money into this particular campaign, right?
And made many, many, many times that in return.
Trillions of market cap. Yeah. Probably in terms of the next 4 years, he'll have created. But then, you have Vivek, another entrepreneur who has made money. And I think that community is pretty densely networked into David and others. Politics aside, David is a very, very bright person. Clearly, he's very successful. And my instinct, based on what I know and what I've seen from what he's going to do, my instinct is it'll probably be something that will, his policy recommendations. And let's see, by the way, if those recommendations are even something that come to effect, because I think this administration has a track record. And previously what we've seen is Donald Trump will do whatever Donald Trump wants to do. So I don't know if they're aligned. He's hired, if you go look at the turnover he had in his previous staff, like that's all the evidence. Is he going to do that again? Is it going to be Elon and all these guys are out in 2 years because he got some falling out? That's a very real probability. I'm not saying you will or won't. I don't know, but that's something he did the first time. But let's assume that they stay there. I think from a crypto perspective, David's done a lot of investing, and I would guess that it's probably going to be net good for the ecosystem. I wonder if it's net good for the US, right? When you look at, I think the challenge for the US is we've long been kind of the currency, the reserve currency for the world. That is starting to erode in certain markets. China, for example, is pushing to be the reserve currency, but then you have this upstart, Bitcoin, which just keeps on ticking up. I mean, I remember, 2010, people were like, it'll never break 1,000. Now we're talking about 100,000. Now, it'll never break 1,000,000. You know what I mean? It feels like, and at one point you're going to have so much value stored in Bitcoin, and okay, fine, Solana, whatever it is, right? But let's call it Bitcoin for now. There is a very real disruption and change that occurs. So the United States has to take a position. Like, for example, do they buy a lot of this? Do they push it up and proactively try to make this phenomenon happen? Because if they don't, right now, Bitcoin is controlled by Chinese miners. There's 2 Chinese miners that are predominantly controlling it. So I think we're at a very interesting power inflection point where if we don't take a proactive role and we let the crypto ecosystem unfold, we will be subject to it. And we may not like the result of that, especially in a world where China is in charge. And I think David, for better or for worse, understands that dynamic. So I think that's interesting. AI, I'm less convinced. I don't know. I haven't seen enough around him in AI to know that. I think the regulatory environment around AI is going to be scary. I wish we had people, like a larger, more influential group of people who were working on this because, I just don't know how technical he is and how much he understands it. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean it in the most genuine way. I don't know if he's my first round draft pick for that, but he most certainly has access to those folks. So, I mean, we'll see. We'll see.